Amara Blake began her shift at 5 a.m. before the first light of day had touched the tall glass windows of Bellamy Trade Corporation in Montreal. She wore a pale gray uniform, mop in hand, ready for another long workday. The Bellamy building, with its 35 gleaming floors, symbolized wealth and success. But to Amara, it was just the place where she worked quietly, unnoticed. She had worked there for 6 years, every day the same, mopping floors, cleaning, and avoiding others' eyes. Amara was more than a janitor. She holds a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Lyon, fluent in French, English, Spanish, and Yoruba. However, her efforts to find a position that matched her qualifications were repeatedly rejected or ignored. She had submitted over 50 internal applications, never receiving a response. That morning, while mopping the main lobby, Amara's phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a number from France, the University of Lyon. Her heart raced. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for. She quietly stepped into a corner and answered in fluent French. It was Professor Monnier, director of the doctoral scholarship program. They discussed her application, a suspected late submission. Amara explained clearly, using professional terminology with ease. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. She looked up to see Lawrence Bellamy, the CEO, standing with Clarice Duncan, her supervisor. Clarice's face was flushed with anger. "I'll call you back," Amara said quickly in French and hung up. "Blake, office, now." Clarice's voice echoed across the lobby. Amara's steps felt heavy as she descended to the basement. In the small office, Clarice gave her a cold look. No phones during work hours. And what were you speaking anyway? That language? French, Amara replied, and instantly regretted it. "I don't care if it's alien speak. What I care about is the CEO saw you chatting like some administrative staff." Clarice announced her punishment. Amara would be reassigned to clean the technical waste area in the basement for 3 months, a smelly, camera-free zone. No overtime, no bonus pay. "Be grateful I didn't fire you," Clarice added before turning away. Amara returned to her small apartment, shared with 2 friends. She looked at her master's degree hanging on the wall, overwhelmed with disappointment. But she knew she couldn't give up. She had come too far to let one more injustice stop her. Amara said nothing as she left the supervisor's office. Her eyes looked straight ahead, her steps steady, but inside she was burning. Her silence wasn't submission. It was quiet resistance. She didn't need to raise her voice to affirm her worth. She knew her value wasn't in the supervisor's shouting, but in every degree and every language she had dedicated her life to mastering. The technical basement, as Clarice had said, had no cameras and no natural light. Flickering tube lights, the stench of chemicals, and industrial waste made it a place most people wouldn't dare return to. To Amara, it was a form of slow punishment. A message. Someone like you shouldn't think you're better than this. 3 days later, while taking out the trash, Amara ran into Thomas, an elderly Haitian electrician. He paused when he saw her cleaning near the main power cables and said softly in French, "You don't belong here." Amara looked up, surprised by the familiar language. She gave a sad smile. "I don't think anyone belongs here." Thomas pointed to her name tag, A. Blake, and whispered, "Blake, I saw that name on the HR proposal list. Last year, but your application was marked unqualified. Strange. Don't you have a master's degree?" Amara was stunned. She hadn't known her application had even reached HR. Someone had tried to block her at the very first step. That evening, she opened her old laptop, accessed the email she'd used for internal job submissions, and reviewed every email, every disappointing memory. There were 12 automated confirmation emails acknowledging her applications. Not one personal reply. She began taking notes, creating spreadsheets, organizing files. Each a rejection. Who was hired instead? Most lacked language credentials. Some had family ties to mid-level managers. She didn't yet know what she'd do with this information, but she knew knowledge was the first step to power. On Friday morning, as she mopped the technical lobby, a receptionist rushed down from the ground floor, breathless. "Amara Blake? The CEO wants to see you on the 35th floor, immediately." Amara put down the mop and wiped her hands on her apron. One question in her mind. Why? She stepped into the elevator, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. The floors passed slowly. Floor 3, accounting. Floor 12, PR. Floor 20, international services. All places she had dreamed of working in, but only entered as a cleaner. When the doors opened on the 35th floor, she could barely breathe. The CEO's office felt like another world, quiet, luxurious, unfamiliar. Walnut wood, frosted glass, and warm golden light. Seated at the desk was Lawrence Bellamy, the most powerful man in the building. Beside him was a brunette woman holding a thick file. "Miss Blake," he said, voice deep and clear. "I witnessed your phone call the other day, and I did what Clarice should have done. I reviewed your file." Amara remained silent. Masters in Applied Linguistics, University of Lyon, 3 published research papers. Fluent in 4 languages, including French and Yoruba, extremely rare, and you're mopping floors. He paused. "May I ask why?" Amara looked him in the eye, for the first time, without lowering her head. "I submitted 52 internal job applications. All were rejected. I once asked Clarice. She said I didn't fit the work environment. I believe that had something to do with how I look." The room fell silent. Mr. Bellamy glanced at the HR assistant beside him. She nodded. "You can start a new position tomorrow. Temporary language coordinator for the France-Belgium Trade Conference. Simultaneous interpretation, cultural liaison, temporary for 5 days. Salary, $4,800 per week." Amara stood still. "What do you think?" Mr. Bellamy asked. "I don't need time to think," Amara replied. "I accept." The next morning, Amara didn't put on her janitor's uniform. Instead, she wore a minimalist dark suit she had bought during a clearance sale 2 years ago, hoping that someday I'll need it. She had always kept it neatly folded in the back of her closet, like a promise to herself, that she was not born to be forgotten. Her employee badge now carried a new title, Amara Blake, Temporary Language Coordinator, France-Belgium Conference. As she walked through the main lobby, people who once avoided her gaze now nodded politely. Clarice Duncan stood frozen at the reception desk. She opened her mouth to say something, but Amara merely gave her a calm smile and kept walking. The 22nd floor conference room glowed with bright lights. Delegates from Paris, Lyon, Brussels, and Montreal had already arrived. Amara showed up an hour early, a habit learned from years of being someone who could never afford to be late. She double-checked the interpreter headset system and reviewed all the prepared materials. Everything seemed flawless, until she opened the French translation of the Trilateral Cooperation Memo. She stopped. A particular phrase jumped out at her. Intérêt irrévocable du partenaire C, translated as irrevocable commitment from partner C. The issue? In French legal language, irrevocable implies the highest level of legal binding, almost impossible to reverse. But the original English phrase was merely preliminary interest, a translation that overstated the commitment. If the French partners signed based on that version, They could potentially sue if the Canadian side withdrew. She kept reading. 7 similar errors. Amara immediately printed the original, marked the problematic sections, and brought them to the prep room, where Mr. Bellamy's assistant was in a meeting with the interpreter team. "Excuse me," Amara said. "I need to flag some serious translation issues." One interpreter, a middle-aged white man named Luke, frowned. "And who are you?" "Amara Blake, language coordinator for this conference." "And you think you can critique a professional's translation?" Luke snapped. "I'm not critiquing. I'm pointing out something that could lead to international litigation." Amara calmly presented each discrepancy, aligning it with the original document. No one could argue. A young assistant whispered, "That translation was done by a company owned by Clarice Duncan's niece." Amara nodded. The puzzle was coming together. She immediately sent a detailed memo to Mr. Bellamy. During the early afternoon session, just as Mr. Bellamy was about to present the cooperation memo, he suddenly paused. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, I've been informed that the French version of our document may contain serious misrepresentations. I'd like to call a 15-minute review break." The room buzzed with murmurs. But in international business, linguistic precision outweighs everything. Amara was invited to speak. She explained clearly, without dramatics, but each sentence landed with weight. When she finished, a delegate from Belgium stood up. "Thank you. Without that discovery, our company might have entered a contract we couldn't honor." "Who found this error?" "I did," Amara replied. "You're the interpreter?" I'm a former janitor." Mr. Bellamy, standing nearby, simply smiled. "She's no longer a former anything," he said. "Miss Blake is one of the most capable professionals we've ever had here." In the eyes of the international delegates, Amara was no longer the janitor who spoke French. She was the one who had saved the entire conference from disaster. After the conference ended in resounding success, Amara didn't leave the building. She knew that a single translation error wouldn't be enough to bring Clarice to justice. It would be dismissed as an unfortunate oversight. But if she wanted to change the system, she needed proof. Undeniable, documented truth. That evening, Amara knocked on the office door of Julian Moreau, a recently hired HR analyst. Julian had been the first person in HR to ever greet her by name. At the time, he had said, "I reviewed your file. Still can't understand why someone like you is in janitorial work." When Amara told him what had happened at the conference, and her suspicions about Clarice's niece's translation company, he didn't look surprised. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "I started investigating 2 months ago," Julian said, meeting her eyes. "But I don't have the authority to act on it. You do." The file had over 30 pages. Inside, invoices from Lingua Nova, the company run by Clarice Duncan's niece, Fiona Duncan. Rate comparisons. Lingua Nova charged 2.5 times the market price. Internal emails between Clarice and Fiona, with suspicious subject lines like, "Upcoming contract, keep this discreet." A list of 8 internal applicants with language degrees, all rejected. Most were immigrants or people of color. Julian added, "I submitted this to the head of HR. Her only reply was, 'Don't touch Clarice if you want to keep your job.'" Amara clenched the folder. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she sent a single email to Lawrence Bellamy. Subject, urgent. Documents for review before 10 a.m. No explanation, no justification, just facts that spoke for themselves. By 9:45 a.m., Mr. Bellamy's assistant called her to the 35th floor. When Amara entered, Mr. Bellamy was there, along with the head of HR, legal counsel, and Clarice Duncan, whose expression was a mixture of irritation and unease. "Miss Blake," Bellamy began, "I've reviewed the documents. Do you have anything to add?" Amara stepped forward and placed the file on the table, color-coded tabs marking every section. "I'm not making accusations, I'm presenting evidence." She outlined 6 questionable invoices, quoted 3 emails hinting at nepotism, and presented statistics. Over 90% of rejected applicants were non-white. Clarice began to stammer. "Who do you think you are? You think a few fancy words in French can—" "It's not a few words," Amara interrupted, steady and firm. "It's 6 years of training and 6 years of being ignored." Silence. Then Mr. Bellamy turned to legal counsel. "I want an independent audit to start immediately. Clarice Duncan is hereby suspended indefinitely, effective now." Clarice screamed, "Lawrence, you can't let some mop girl destroy my career." "No one destroyed your career," Bellamy said quietly. "You did that yourself." 3 days later, Bellamy made it official. Amara Blake was appointed interim director of multilingual communications and placed in charge of a new initiative. Project Silent Voices, a full review of the company's hiring and promotion practices, focused on overlooked staff. Within a month, the project uncovered that over 130 lower-level employees held advanced qualifications. Half had submitted internal applications with no reply. Nearly 80% were people of color, immigrants, or women. Amara's story spread across the Bellamy Group. Colleagues who once kept their distance now approached her, sharing resumes, skills, and a simple hope: to be seen fairly. A few months later, Amara presented her proposal to the company's founding board, Longs Invisible, a program to identify, train, and promote staff overlooked due to race, background, or accent. 6 months in, 34 logistics employees were promoted. 19 former janitors became client coordinators. Translation costs dropped by 63%. International client satisfaction rose by over 40%. On the final day of the year, Amara stood on the 35th floor balcony, watching snow blanket Montreal. She called her mother, once a university professor in Nigeria, who became a nurse in Canada before passing away during Amara's graduate studies. "Mama, I don't mop floors anymore. I don't whisper French in hallways. Today, I just approved a scholarship for the cafeteria manager's daughter. She loves languages like I once did." Under the soft lights, Amara smiled. Not with pride, not with glory, but with relief, because at last she was no longer the brilliant girl no one noticed.